The rain hit the old, rusted roof of the abandoned warehouse with a fury, creating an almost deafening noise inside. Ethan Blackwood stood near the small fire he had managed to light, his eyes scanning the dark, damp interior. He wasn't supposed to be here, but the storm had forced him to take shelter in this forgotten corner of the city, far from the luxury of his high-rise apartment and the bustling world of corporate boardrooms he usually inhabited. As the wind howled outside, he noticed movement in the shadows. His body tensed, instinctively ready for the unexpected. He wasn't alone. From behind a stack of broken crates, a figure emerged. A girl, no more than 16, soaking wet and shivering violently. Her eyes, wide and filled with fear, locked onto his. "Hey, it's okay," Ethan said, raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I'm just taking shelter from the storm. Like you." The girl didn't respond, her gaze flickering nervously between him and the exit. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her long dark hair matted from the rain. Ethan could see she was no ordinary runaway. Something about her felt familiar, though he couldn't place why. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "Amelia," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. She stepped back as if ready to flee at any moment, her frail body shaking uncontrollably. Ethan's heart tightened at the sight of her. A part of him, the logical, detached businessman, told him to turn away, to leave her there and focus on his own survival. But there was another part of him, deep inside, that wouldn't let him walk away. Something about her pulled at him, a connection he couldn't explain. "Look, I'm not going to hurt you," he continued, taking a cautious step forward. "You're freezing. Come closer to the fire. Please." Amelia hesitated, her distrust evident, but her desperation for warmth won over her fear. Slowly, she inched closer to the small fire, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her body. As she crouched down, Ethan could see the deep exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from more than just the physical weariness of being caught in a storm. This girl had been through something far worse. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" he asked quietly. Amelia shook her head but remained silent, her gaze fixed on the flames, avoiding his eyes. Ethan's mind raced. Who was she? What had happened to her? His instinct told him there was more to her story than a simple runaway scenario. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, to make sure she was safe. But why? Why did he care so much? He didn't even know her. "Do you have family? Someone I can call for you?" he asked. "No," she replied, her voice cracking slightly. "There's no one." The storm outside raged on, but inside the warehouse, the silence between them grew heavy. Ethan could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that meeting her here, tonight, wasn't a coincidence. As the fire crackled, Ethan sat down next to her, keeping his distance but close enough to let her know he was there. "I'm Ethan," he offered. "I don't know what brought you here, but I can help you. I can find you a place to stay, someone who can." "I don't want help," she interrupted, her voice sharper now, the fear momentarily replaced by something else, defiance. "I just need to stay here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll go." Ethan frowned, taken aback by her sudden change in tone. There was something about her that didn't add up. Most people in her situation would be begging for help, but she was pushing him away, determined to keep her distance. "All right," he said softly, "you can stay. But tomorrow, we're going to figure something out. You don't have to do this alone." Amelia didn't answer. She pulled her knees to her chest and stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Ethan leaned back, watching her out of the corner of his eye. The storm outside was relentless, but the real storm, he knew, was the one raging inside this mysterious girl. As the night dragged on, Ethan found himself unable to shake the strange connection he felt to her. Something about her presence stirred memories long buried, emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. But he couldn't understand why. Who was she, really? And why did it feel like his life was about to change forever? The storm was far from over, and so was the night. The storm had subsided by morning, leaving behind the faint echo of raindrops sliding off the metal roof. The cold dampness still clung to the air, but the warehouse was now eerily quiet. Ethan stirred from a restless sleep, rubbing his eyes as he glanced at the corner where Amelia had huddled the night before. She was gone. Panic flashed through him. He stood abruptly, his eyes scanning the empty space. The fire had long since died, leaving only charred remains of the wood he'd found. His mind raced. Had she left on her own? Was she in danger? He didn't even know where she might go. Without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and stormed outside into the cold, wet streets. The city was waking up, its usual hum of life slowly returning. He looked in every direction, hoping for a glimpse of her. Nothing. The streets were crowded, but she was nowhere to be found. Damn it, he muttered under his breath, frustrated with himself. He had let her slip away. As Ethan made his way back to his car, a sinking feeling settled in his gut. That strange connection, that inexplicable pull he had felt toward her, it hadn't left. If anything, it was growing stronger. He couldn't stop thinking about her, and it wasn't just concern for a stranger. It was something deeper, something that tugged at his very core. But why? Later that afternoon, as he sat in his office trying to concentrate on work, his thoughts kept drifting back to Amelia. His desk was cluttered with files and paperwork, contracts for deals he should be reviewing, but all of it seemed insignificant now. His mind replayed the brief moments they had shared, her frightened eyes, the defiance in her voice, the way she had refused help. "I don't want help." Those words echoed in his head over and over. He closed his laptop, rubbing his temples in frustration. This was ridiculous. He didn't know this girl, had no reason to feel this attached, yet here he was, distracted, worried, and unable to shake the feeling that she was in danger. Just as he was about to force himself to focus, his phone buzzed on the desk. It was an unknown number. Hesitant, Ethan picked it up and answered. "Hello?" A pause, then a voice. "Ethan?" He froze. It was Amelia. "Amelia? Where are you?" He stood up from his desk, urgency filling his voice. I need help," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who else to call." His heart raced. "Tell me where you are. I'll come get you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I'm at the park near the old library," she finally said, her voice shaky. Ethan grabbed his keys and was out the door before she finished her sentence. The drive to the park was a blur, his mind racing with questions. Why had she called him? Why hadn't she left the city, like she said she would? And more importantly, why was he feeling this overwhelming need to protect her? When he arrived at the park, he spotted her sitting alone on a bench, her small figure huddled against the cold. She was still wearing the same ragged clothes, her face pale and drawn. As he approached, she looked up at him with the same haunted expression she'd had the night before. "Amelia," he said gently, sitting beside her. "What's going on? Why did you leave like that?" She didn't meet his gaze, her eyes fixed on the ground. I thought I could handle it. I didn't want to be a burden." But, her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard before continuing. "Something's wrong, Ethan. I don't know how to explain it, but I can't shake the feeling that I know you." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She felt it too. The strange connection between them wasn't just in his head. "I've been feeling the same way," he confessed, leaning forward, trying to make sense of it all. "It's like I've met you before, but I know I haven't. I can't explain it either, but there's something here, Amelia. Something I can't ignore." Amelia finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "I don't understand it either, but ever since I saw you, I've had these flashes, like memories that aren't mine, and they all lead back to you." Ethan's pulse quickened. This was more than just a coincidence. There was something connecting them, something they couldn't yet see. He needed answers, and so did she. "Come with me," he said, standing up and offering his hand. "Let's figure this out together." Amelia hesitated for a moment, then slowly placed her hand in his. "Okay," she whispered, her voice fragile but determined. As they walked back to his car, a cold wind swept through the park, sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. He didn't know what they were about to uncover, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. Something dark and dangerous was lurking beneath the surface, and whatever it was, it had already begun to pull them deeper into its grip. And neither of them would be able to walk away unscathed. Days passed, and despite the growing tension between them, Ethan and Amelia settled into a strange, fragile routine. She stayed at his apartment, though they spoke little about what had brought them together. The unspoken bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, but neither dared to address it head-on. Ethan spent his nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning every decision he had made since the storm. He had always prided himself on being rational, driven by logic, but now his life was being controlled by a girl he barely knew and a feeling he couldn't explain. Amelia was a puzzle, and the more time he spent with her, the more he realized he was missing crucial pieces. One morning, as Ethan sat at his kitchen table, his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up absent-mindedly, assuming it was another work email. But when he opened the message, he froze. The message was from an unknown number. "She's not who you think she is. Get rid of her while you still can." His stomach twisted. He read the message again, hoping he had misunderstood. But the words were clear, a warning, a threat. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Who could have sent this? And how did they know about Amelia? He looked across the room where Amelia sat curled up on the couch, her knees tucked under her chin as she stared out the window, lost in her own thoughts. She had no idea what was happening, and he had no intention of telling her. Not yet. Without thinking, Ethan deleted the message and set the phone down. But the unease lingered. His mind raced with questions. Was someone watching them? Had Amelia's past caught up with her? Or was it something more sinister? Something connected to that inexplicable bond they shared? He tried to push the thoughts away, but as the day went on, the tension gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing minute. Later that night, just as Ethan was about to head to bed, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message was more direct. "You're in over your head. I know what she really is. And soon, so will you." A chill ran down his spine. Ethan glanced at Amelia, who was asleep on the couch, unaware of the danger that seemed to be closing in around them. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone knew something, something important, something dark. He couldn't keep this from her any longer. The next morning, over breakfast, Ethan set his coffee down and cleared his throat. "Amelia, there's something we need to talk about." She looked up from her plate, her expression guarded. "What is it?" "I've been getting messages," he said slowly, gauging her reaction. "From someone. They're about you." Amelia's face went pale. She set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. "What do you mean? Messages?" Ethan hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "They're warnings. Someone seems to know about you, about us, and they're not happy." Amelia's eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. "What did they say?" Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling to the messages he had saved. He read them aloud, watching as Amelia's face drained of color. "I don't know who's sending these," he continued, "but they seem to know something about you that I don't." Amelia looked away, her jaw clenched tightly. "I don't know who could be doing this." "Amelia," Ethan said firmly, leaning forward, "I've been patient. I haven't pushed you for answers, but I need to know what's going on. Who are you running from? And why does it feel like there's more to this than you're telling me?" For a long moment, she didn't respond. The tension between them thickened, her silence more damning than any answer she could give. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I haven't told you." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of her words before they even left her mouth. "I don't remember much about my past," she began, her eyes distant as if she were trying to pull fragments of memories from deep inside. "But I do know that people have been watching me for as long as I can remember. They've been following me, tracking my every move. I thought I could get away from them, but it's like no matter where I go, they're always one step ahead." Ethan frowned, trying to piece together what she was saying. "Who are these people? Why are they following you?" "I don't know exactly," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But I think they want something from me, something I don't even know I have. And now they found me again." Ethan's mind raced, struggling to make sense of her words. He stood up, pacing the room. This doesn't make sense, Amelia. Why would they go to such lengths? Why follow you for so long? I don't know, she snapped, her frustration boiling over. I don't know who I am, Ethan. I don't know why I feel like I know you, why I feel like we're connected somehow. But this, whatever this is, it's bigger than both of us. Ethan stopped in his tracks, the weight of her words settling over him. He felt a knot form in his stomach as an unsettling realization began to creep into his mind. What if these messages weren't just empty threats? What if they were a warning? His phone buzzed again, breaking the tension. He glanced at the screen, his heart sinking as he read the newest message. You have no idea what you're dealing with. She's not safe. Neither are you. Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned to Amelia, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We need to find out who's doing this, Amelia, and we need to do it fast. She looked up at him, her fear mirrored in his eyes. I don't know where to start. We'll figure it out, Ethan said, determination taking over. But first, we need to stay ahead of whoever's sending these messages. We can't trust anyone. Amelia nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. Okay, I'll tell you everything I remember. No more secrets. As they sat down together, ready to face the truth, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to unravel in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. Whatever darkness had found them, it was closing in fast, and there was no turning back now. Ethan sat in stunned silence as Amelia began to recount the fragments of her past. Her voice trembled, but there was a determination in her eyes, a readiness to reveal the secrets she had kept buried for so long. I don't know where I was born, she started, her gaze fixed on the table as if she were piecing the memories together for the first time. I was raised in a series of foster homes, moving from one place to another. There was no stability. No one stayed long enough to care about me. Ethan's heart ached as he listened. He had grown up with every advantage, a stable family, a path to success laid out before him. But Amelia, she had known nothing but abandonment and fear. But there was one place, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, where things were different. I was around 7 when they took me in. It wasn't like the other homes. It felt more like a facility. Ethan frowned, leaning forward. What kind of facility? Amelia shook her head. I don't know exactly. It was run by this group of people. They never told us much, but I knew something was wrong. There were other kids there, but none of us were allowed to talk to each other. Everything was controlled, monitored. And then, one day, I ran. She stopped, her hands trembling as she recounted the escape. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. I've been running ever since. Ethan processed her words, the puzzle pieces slowly falling into place. This group. You think they've been following you all this time? She nodded. Yes. And they're not just following me. They want something from me. I've always felt like I'm missing something. A part of me that I don't understand. Ethan's phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. Unknown number. Without thinking, he answered, putting it on speaker. Who is this? There was a pause, then a cold, male voice responded. You're asking the wrong questions, Mr. Blackwood. Ethan's blood ran cold. The voice was calculated, detached. What do you want? He demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. It's not about what we want, the voice replied calmly. It's about what you're too blind to see. She's more dangerous than you realize. Amelia tensed, her eyes widening with fear as she heard the voice. Ethan placed a protective hand on her shoulder, his mind racing. What do you mean? Why are you after her? The voice chuckled darkly. It's not about her. It's about you. The truth is right in front of you, Mr. Blackwood, but you're too close to see it. That girl, she's not just a lost soul. She's a weapon. And you, my friend, are holding the trigger. Before Ethan could respond, the line went dead. He slammed the phone down, anger boiling inside him. What the hell does that mean? He muttered, pacing the room. Amelia's face had drained of all color. They're getting closer, she whispered. They know where I am. Ethan turned to her, his mind spinning. Amelia, we need answers. You said you don't remember much, but there has to be something. Anything that can explain why they're after you. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force the memories to surface. I remember doctors. There were always doctors. They ran tests on us, but they never told us why. There was always this one man. He was different from the others. I think he was in charge. Ethan's heart sank as he heard the fear in her voice. What did he do? He watched me, she replied, her voice barely audible. Every time they ran the tests, he would stand there, watching. And then one day, I overheard something. They were talking about DNA, about me being special. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. DNA? He had spent years in the tech industry, surrounded by advances in genetics and artificial intelligence. Could that be connected to what was happening now? Suddenly, a terrible thought crossed his mind. He rushed to his laptop, typing frantically into the search engine. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he pulled up a series of files, classified documents he had acquired years ago during a project involving cutting-edge genetic research. As the files loaded, a chilling realization hit him. Amelia, he said, his voice shaking. The DNA. It's mine. She stared at him in shock. What do you mean? Ethan scrolled through the files, his hands trembling. Years ago, I worked on a project involving artificial insemination, experimental technology. It was supposed to revolutionize the field of genetics. But the project was shut down after a series of complications. Amelia's eyes widened, horror dawning on her face. You're saying you're my daughter, Ethan whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. The room fell into a deafening silence. Amelia staggered back, her face a mask of confusion and disbelief. That can't be possible. I don't understand. How? Ethan's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. That facility where you were raised, it wasn't just some random place. It was connected to the project. They must have used my DNA. Without my knowledge, he collapsed into a chair, his hands running through his hair. They must have wanted to create someone like you. And when the project was shut down, they kept you hidden, raised you as part of their experiment. Tears filled Amelia's eyes as the weight of the revelation crashed over her. So, everything I am, everything I've been running from, it all comes back to you. Ethan felt a wave of guilt wash over him. I didn't know, he said quietly, his voice filled with regret. I swear, I had no idea. Amelia turned away, unable to meet his gaze. They used me, Ethan. They used both of us. The truth hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Ethan had spent his life building an empire, thinking he had control over his fate. But now, everything had been turned upside down. His past had come back to haunt him in the form of the very daughter he never knew existed. And now, she was in danger because of him. Before he could say anything more, his phone buzzed once again. Another message, but this time, it was worse. You found the truth. But now it's too late. She's ours. Ethan's heart sank as he looked up at Amelia. The danger was closer than ever, and they had no time left. We need to go, he said urgently, grabbing her hand. Now. Amelia didn't resist. Her eyes were filled with terror, but also something else, resolve. As they rushed toward the door, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The storm had brought them together, but it was only a prelude to the chaos that was about to unfold. They were no longer running from shadows. The enemy was real, and they were closing in fast. And this time, there would be no escape. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he and Amelia rushed down the hallway, the urgency of the situation weighing heavily on them. The elevator doors slid open, and they hurried inside. The metal box felt claustrophobic as it descended, the weight of their newfound connection pressing down on both of them. Amelia's face was pale, her eyes distant, processing the revelation that her life, her very existence, was the result of an experiment she had never known about. Ethan's mind raced as the elevator descended toward the underground parking garage. He had always been meticulous, careful in every decision he made. But now, he was blindsided, forced to face a past he had never known existed. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, had been created in secret, used by those who sought to exploit his legacy. And now they wanted her back. For what? He didn't know. But the terrifying messages told him they had no intention of letting her go. As the elevator dinged and the doors slid open, Ethan guided Amelia to his car. He was about to unlock it when a thought struck him. What if they were being watched? He stopped, scanning the parking garage. The low hum of distant engines echoed through the space, but something felt off. His instincts, honed by years in the cutthroat world of business, screamed at him to be cautious. "Get in," he whispered urgently, glancing around for any signs of danger. Amelia hesitated, sensing his anxiety, but did as he said. Once inside the car, Ethan locked the doors and took a deep breath. He needed a plan, but first, they had to disappear. As he started the engine, Amelia broke the silence. "What now?" Her voice was quiet, tinged with fear and uncertainty. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly. "We need to lay low, figure out who's behind this. These people, they're not just after you. They're after me too." She looked at him, her eyes wide. "Why? I thought it was just about me." Ethan shook his head. "It's more than that. There's someone I've been at odds with for years. A rival, someone I thought I had left behind a long time ago. But this feels like him. It's his style." Amelia frowned. "Who?" Ethan took a sharp turn, heading toward a less populated part of the city. "His name is Victor Aldrich. We were partners once, working on revolutionary tech that would change the world. But when I pulled out of the project, because of the ethical implications, he doubled down. We had a major falling out. I thought I'd won that war, but now, I think he's back." The name seemed to bring a chill into the car, as if mentioning Victor Aldrich had somehow drawn him closer. Ethan's mind flashed back to the last time he had seen Victor. Years ago, in a boardroom, where the two had faced off over the future of a project they had both invested their lives into. It was a project that had gone beyond mere technology. It had crossed into the realms of human manipulation, cloning, genetic engineering, and the dark underbelly of science. Ethan had pulled out, disgusted by the direction it had taken, but Victor had stayed. And now, it seemed, the ghosts of that project had come back to haunt them both. "You think he's the one sending the messages?" Amelia asked, her voice shaking. Ethan glanced at her, nodding. "He always plays the long game. And this, using the DNA from that project, it's exactly the kind of twisted revenge he'd go for. But I don't understand why now, after all these years." As they drove deeper into the city's outskirts, Ethan pulled into an abandoned industrial complex, a place he had used before when he needed to stay under the radar. It was secluded, hidden from the prying eyes of the city, but accessible enough if they needed to move quickly. Ethan parked the car and turned to face Amelia. "We'll stay here for a while. It's safe for now. I need to make some calls, figure out what Victor's next move is." Amelia looked around the empty warehouse district, her fear palpable. "How do we stop him?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. "First, we need to know what he wants. And to do that, I need to reach out to someone who used to be close to him." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Someone you trust?" Ethan hesitated. "Not exactly. But he's the only one who might have answers." They stepped out of the car, and Ethan led her inside one of the abandoned buildings, setting up a makeshift camp in an office that had been long deserted. As he pulled out his phone, dialing a number he had hoped never to use again, his mind buzzed with anticipation. If Victor was involved, it was only a matter of time before he made his move. But this time, Ethan wouldn't be blindsided. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Blackwood, didn't expect to hear from you again." "I'm not calling for small talk," Ethan said, cutting to the chase. "It's Victor. He's back." The man on the other end of the line, Simon Grayson, was once a confidant of Victor's before he had been cast out of the inner circle. He had helped Ethan take Victor down years ago, but their relationship had always been fragile at best. "You're sure?" Simon asked, his tone skeptical. "I'm sure. He's been sending messages, targeting someone close to me. It's tied to the old project, specifically the genetic experiments." Simon was silent for a moment, and Ethan could hear the faint sound of typing in the background. "I heard whispers," Simon finally said. "Victor's been working underground for years. Word is, he's been building something. Something big. Ethan's heart sank. What? I don't have all the details, but from what I've pieced together, he's been using tech from the old project. Genetic engineering, cloning, mind control, you name it. He's been gathering resources, people, influence. He's not playing small anymore, Blackwood. If he's targeting you, it's because you're standing in the way of something much bigger. Ethan clenched his jaw, the gravity of the situation sinking in. What does he want with Amelia? I don't know, Simon replied, but if she's tied to the project, she's valuable to him. You need to be careful. Victor's dangerous, and if he's found you, he won't stop until he gets what he wants. Ethan hung up, the cold dread pooling in his stomach. He turned to Amelia, who had been listening intently. Victor's planning something bigger than we realized. And you're part of it. Amelia's face was pale, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. What do we do now? Ethan stood, his mind whirling with possibilities. We can't keep running. If we're going to stop Victor, we need to go on the offensive. I'll gather more information, find out what his next move is. But I need you to trust me, Amelia. We'll get through this. She nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. You really think we can stop him? Ethan's gaze hardened. We have to. He won't stop until he gets what he wants, and I'm not about to let him take you. As the weight of their next steps settled over them, Ethan knew they were stepping into a battle far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. Victor Aldridge wasn't just a rival from his past. He was a force that had been waiting in the shadows, preparing to strike. And now, the game had begun. The industrial safehouse was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of a single overhead bulb that flickered occasionally. Ethan and Amelia sat in silence, the weight of their situation settling heavily over them. The hours passed slowly, tension mounting as Ethan tried to piece together what their next move would be. They couldn't hide forever. Victor was out there, and he was playing a game far more dangerous than either of them had realized. Ethan had been on edge since the phone call with Simon. His rival was always a step ahead, lurking in the shadows, pulling strings. He felt like a pawn in Victor's twisted game, and it infuriated him. But it was Amelia's presence, the vulnerable yet mysterious daughter he had unknowingly fathered, that made everything more complicated. She wasn't just a victim. She was a key piece of Victor's plan, though they still didn't know exactly why. Suddenly, a loud ping echoed in the room. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Amelia flinched, her eyes darting to the device as Ethan grabbed it off the table. Another message. This time, it was different from the cryptic threats they had received before. It contained a single link. What is it? Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan hesitated. He didn't trust anything coming from an unknown source, especially not from someone like Victor. But curiosity, and a need for answers, pushed him to open the link. He clicked it, and his screen flashed before loading a video. The footage was grainy, as if it had been recorded years ago, but the setting was unmistakable. A cold, sterile lab. Ethan's stomach clenched. He recognized the place immediately. It's the facility, he muttered, more to himself than to Amelia. His eyes scanned the scene. Scientists in white coats moving about, machines humming softly in the background. His breath caught when he spotted someone, that made his blood freeze. In the middle of the room, restrained on a hospital bed, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her eyes were wide with fear, her small body hooked up to machines. Ethan leaned in closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The camera zoomed in, and the girl's face became clear. It was Amelia. "Oh my God," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's you." Amelia's hand flew to her mouth as she stared at the screen. I don't remember this," she said, her voice trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. The video continued, showing a man entering the room. He wore a black suit, his face partially obscured by the angle of the camera. But Ethan knew exactly who it was, Victor Aldridge. His rival stood over the young Amelia, watching as the machines buzzed around her, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. Ethan felt a surge of rage. "That bastard," he growled. "He's been using you from the start." The video played on, and Victor began speaking to the scientists. His voice was calm, almost dispassionate. "She's the perfect candidate," he said, gesturing to Amelia. "Her genetic profile is exactly what we need. Continue the process. I want results within the next year." The scientists nodded, their faces hidden behind masks of professionalism, as they adjusted the machines connected to Amelia. The camera zoomed out, showing more of the facility. Rows of beds, each with a child strapped down, each undergoing the same horrific treatment. Ethan's blood boiled. This was never just about technology, he muttered. Victor wasn't just working on advancing genetics. He was building an army. Amelia's eyes widened, her breath quickening. An army of what? Ethan turned to her, his expression grim. Children. Children like you. Created, manipulated, enhanced. He was using the DNA from our project to engineer something beyond human. And you, Amelia, you were the first. Amelia recoiled, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to process the revelation. I was an experiment. Ethan's heart broke at the sight of her. He had spent years building his empire, fighting to leave a legacy. But this was the legacy he had never known about, one that Victor had twisted into something monstrous. His own daughter, used as a pawn in a game of genetic manipulation. Before he could say anything more, the video abruptly cut off, replaced by a message that flashed across the screen in bold red letters. Now you understand. She belongs to me. Ethan slammed the phone down, his anger reaching a boiling point. We're not running anymore, he said through gritted teeth. This ends now. Amelia shook her head, her voice shaky. But how? He's everywhere. He's been controlling this from the start. We don't even know where he is. We will, Ethan said, determination hardening his voice. We'll find him and we'll stop him. But before they could formulate a plan, a loud crash echoed through the building. Both of them froze, their eyes darting toward the door. They found us, Ethan whispered. Without another word, Ethan grabbed Amelia's hand and pulled her toward the back of the office, where a hidden exit led to a narrow alleyway. But as they reached the door, the sound of footsteps grew louder, multiple sets, closing in from all sides. Go, Ethan urged, pushing Amelia toward the exit. I'll hold them off. No, she cried, panic filling her voice. I'm not leaving you. But before either of them could move, the door burst open, and a group of armed men flooded into the room. Their faces were covered by black masks, their weapons trained on Ethan and Amelia. One of the men stepped forward, removing his mask. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Ethan's, a twisted smile spreading across his face. Blackwood, the man said smoothly. You should have stayed out of this. Ethan's fists clenched at the sight of the man. Victor Aldridge, standing before him, alive and well, and more dangerous than ever. Victor, Ethan spat, stepping protectively in front of Amelia. You don't touch her. Victor chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, Ethan, always the hero, aren't you? But you've lost this game. Amelia was never yours to protect. She's mine. My creation, my success. Ethan felt a surge of rage as he stepped forward, but Victor raised a hand, signaling his men to aim their weapons at him. Let me make this simple, Victor said, his voice cold and measured. She comes with me, and you get to live. Resist and, well, you know how this ends. Amelia's grip tightened on Ethan's arm, her eyes wide with terror. Ethan, please. Don't let him take me. Ethan's heart raced. He knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, but there was no way he was going to let Victor win. Not after everything. He took a deep breath, then turned to Amelia. Run, he whispered. Before she could protest, Ethan shoved her toward the back exit, then turned to face Victor and his men, knowing full well this could be the last fight he ever faced. But he didn't care. Protecting Amelia was all that mattered now. Ethan braced himself, the adrenaline coursing through his veins as the door slammed shut behind Amelia. His eyes locked with Victor's, who stood only a few feet away, his smug grin unwavering. The room was thick with tension, the air almost crackling with the weight of the confrontation. You've always been stubborn, Ethan, Victor said, his tone casual, as if they were old friends discussing a business deal. But this is you being reckless. You can't stop me. You never could. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He knew Victor was right about one thing. The odds were stacked against him, but there was no way he was going to let Victor get to Amelia. Not after everything he had learned. She was his daughter, and more than that, she was an innocent caught in the web of a madman's scheme. "You're not taking her," Ethan said, his voice steady but laced with fury. "I don't care what it takes." Victor's grin faded, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't about care, Ethan. It's about power, control, and you've already lost." The men surrounding Victor shifted, their weapons ready. But Ethan wasn't thinking about his own survival anymore. His mind was focused on buying Amelia enough time to escape. He glanced toward the door Amelia had disappeared through, hoping she was already far enough away. "I was always better at this than you, Victor," Ethan growled. "I didn't need to stoop to this level to win." Victor's face darkened with anger. "Always so righteous, Ethan. Always pretending you're above it all. But in the end, you couldn't even protect your own flesh and blood." At those words, Ethan snapped. With lightning-fast reflexes, he lunged at Victor, his fists swinging in a blind fury. The two men collided with a thud, sending both crashing into a nearby desk. Victor's men moved forward, but Ethan's sheer rage bought him a few precious seconds. He landed a solid punch across Victor's jaw, knocking him to the ground. Victor spat blood, laughing even as he wiped his mouth. "You really think this changes anything?" he taunted, rising to his feet. "You're just delaying the inevitable." Before Ethan could respond, one of the guards grabbed him from behind, yanking him backward and slamming him against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he gasped for breath as two more men restrained him, pinning his arms to his sides. Victor straightened his jacket, his eyes burning with cold fury. "I'm done playing games, Ethan. This was never about you. It was about her. And now, I'll finish what I started." Ethan struggled against the men holding him, but it was no use. He was trapped, helpless as Victor reached for his phone, dialing a number with unsettling calmness. "Find her," he said into the phone, his voice sharp. "Now." Panic surged through Ethan. "No, don't." But before he could finish, one of the men struck him across the face, sending a fresh wave of pain through his skull. Victor leaned in close, his breath hot against Ethan's ear. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'll make sure she's well taken care of. After all, she was always meant to be mine." Rage bubbled up inside Ethan, but before he could react, Victor's phone buzzed with a new message. He glanced at the screen, his face lighting up with satisfaction. "Perfect," Victor muttered. "They found her." Ethan's heart plummeted. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. Victor didn't bother answering. He turned to his men, barking orders. "Secure the perimeter. Make sure no one leaves the area." As Victor's men fanned out, Ethan struggled against his captors, his mind racing. He needed to get to Amelia, but he was outnumbered, outmatched. Every second counted, and if he didn't act fast, Victor's men would take her, drag her back into the nightmare she had been running from her whole life. In that moment, something inside Ethan snapped. A surge of desperation and protectiveness overwhelmed him. He let out a guttural roar, wrenching his arms free from the men's grip with a sudden burst of strength. The surprise move caught them off guard, and before they could react, Ethan elbowed one guard in the face, sending him sprawling to the ground. He spun around, driving his knee into the second man's stomach. The guard doubled over, gasping for air, and Ethan wasted no time delivering a sharp punch that sent the man crumpling to the floor. Victor, stunned by the sudden shift, took a step back, his face contorting with fury. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Ignoring him, Ethan bolted toward the exit. He had no idea how long Amelia had before they caught up to her, but he knew one thing. He had to reach her first. He sprinted through the industrial complex, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. His heart pounded in his chest, and the taste of blood filled his mouth from the earlier blow, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting to Amelia before it was too late. As he rounded a corner, he saw her. Amelia was running down the alley behind the complex, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But just as she neared the exit, a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of her, blocking her path. Two of Victor's men jumped out, their guns drawn. "No!" Ethan shouted, his voice carrying through the alley. Amelia froze, her eyes widening in terror as the men closed in on her. But before they could grab her, Ethan threw himself at the nearest man, knocking him off balance. They crashed to the ground, grappling for control, as Amelia stumbled backward. "Run!" Ethan yelled, his voice hoarse. But Amelia didn't move. She stood frozen, her eyes locked on the scene in front of her, fear rooting her in place. With a burst of strength, Ethan overpowered the man, slamming him against the side of the SUV. But the second guard was already moving, raising his gun toward Amelia. "No!" Ethan screamed, but it was too late. A single gunshot rang out, echoing through the alley. Time seemed to slow as Ethan watched in horror. Amelia collapsed, clutching her side as blood began to seep through her fingers. "Amelia!" Ethan's voice cracked with panic as he rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he pressed them against her wound. "No, no, no. Stay with me, Amelia. Stay with me." Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, as she looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain and fear. "Ethan, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, don't say that," Ethan choked out, tears blurring his vision. "You're going to be okay. I'm going to get you out of here." But as he glanced up, he saw Victor standing at the far end of the alley, watching with cold satisfaction. "This is what happens when you cross me, Ethan," Victor said, his voice echoing through the alley. "You lose everything." Ethan's rage boiled over. He wanted to tear Victor apart, to make him pay for what he had done. But right now, all that mattered was Amelia. "I'll kill you," Ethan growled, his voice filled with raw fury. "I'll make sure you never touch her again." Victor smiled cruelly. "You're welcome to try." As Victor's men regrouped, readying themselves for another attack, Ethan realized that time was running out. He had to make a choice: fight Victor now or save Amelia. Without another word, he scooped Amelia into his arms, ignoring the searing pain in his own body, and ran. Ethan's legs burned with exhaustion as he sprinted through the dimly lit alley, carrying Amelia's limp body in his arms. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. Blood seeped through his shirt, Amelia's wound worsening with every passing second. He didn't have much time. They didn't have much time. Behind him, he could hear the distant shouts of Victor's men, their footsteps closing in. But Ethan didn't dare look back. His focus was solely on Amelia. Her face pale, her breathing shallow, her body growing heavier in his arms. She was slipping away, and the thought of losing her filled him with a terror he hadn't felt in years. "There's a hospital up ahead," Ethan muttered under his breath, as if saying it aloud would somehow make it closer. He turned a sharp corner, emerging onto a deserted street. In the distance, the red emergency sign of a small clinic flickered weakly. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. "Hold on, Amelia," he whispered urgently. "Please, just hold on." Her eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused as she weakly reached up to touch his face. I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice faint. "No," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "Don't apologize. You're going to be okay. I'm not losing you, not like this." Amelia's hand fell limply to her side as her eyes closed again, her breathing growing more labored. Ethan's chest tightened, panic threatening to consume him, but he forced himself to keep moving. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not now, not when they were so close. Bursting through the clinic doors, Ethan shouted for help. Nurses rushed toward him, their faces filled with alarm as they saw the blood-soaked figure in his arms. "Gunshot wound," Ethan gasped, nearly collapsing as he handed Amelia over to the medical team. "She needs help now." They moved quickly, placing Amelia on a gurney and wheeling her down the hallway toward the emergency room. Ethan tried to follow, but one of the nurses blocked his path. "Sir, you need to stay here," she said firmly, guiding him to a chair. We'll do everything we can. Ethan watched helplessly as the doors to the operating room swung shut behind them, sealing him off from the only person in the world he couldn't afford to lose. His heart raced, his hands trembling as he stared at the blood staining his clothes, her blood. He had failed her. The weight of it all crashed down on him. For years, Ethan had thought he was in control, that he could outsmart and outmaneuver anyone who tried to challenge him. But now, standing in a sterile hospital waiting room, covered in the blood of the daughter he never knew he had, he realized how wrong he had been. Victor had won. As Ethan sat there, his mind replayed the moments leading up to the gunshot, the cold satisfaction in Victor's eyes, the way Amelia had collapsed into his arms, the helplessness that had washed over him as he watched her bleed out. He had sworn to protect her, and he had failed. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. The quiet hum of the hospital, the distant sound of doctors and nurses moving through the hallways, it all faded into the background. All Ethan could do was wait and pray. Finally, the doors to the emergency room opened, and a doctor stepped out, his face grim but not without hope. "Mr. Blackwood?" he asked. Ethan shot to his feet, his heart in his throat. "Is she?" "She's stable," the doctor said, holding up a hand to calm him. "The bullet missed any major organs, but she lost a lot of blood. We've repaired the damage, but she'll need time to recover." Ethan let out a shaky breath, relief washing over him like a tidal wave. "Thank you," he whispered, feeling the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. The doctor nodded, his expression softening. "She's a fighter, but it's going to be a long road ahead." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "She's still unconscious, but you can sit with her." Ethan followed the doctor to a small, quiet room where Amelia lay, pale but breathing steadily. Her face was peaceful, her body covered in a thin blanket, bandages wrapped tightly around her side. He pulled a chair up next to the bed and sat down, his eyes never leaving her. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to exhale. She was alive. That was all that mattered. Hours later, as the night deepened, Ethan's phone buzzed again. His entire body tensed. He glanced down at the screen, fully expecting another taunt from Victor. But it wasn't. The message was from Simon Grayson, the old associate Ethan had contacted for help. "I found something. Call me now." Ethan stepped out into the hallway, his mind racing as he dialed the number. Simon answered almost immediately, his voice tense. "Blackwood, I've been digging through some old files. You were right about Victor. He's not just after Amelia. He's been using your DNA to create more like her. Enhanced, engineered, just like the original project. But this time, he's perfected it." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "Victor has been building an army of genetically modified individuals. And Amelia, she was just the first." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Where is he?" "There's an offshore facility," Simon said, "hidden deep within the system. That's where he's been conducting these experiments, where he's holding the others." Ethan's heart raced. Victor's plan wasn't just about revenge. It was far bigger than that. He was creating an entire generation of genetically enhanced beings, using the technology Ethan had helped develop all those years ago. "Send me the location," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "I'm ending this." "Be careful, Ethan," Simon warned. "Victor won't let you walk away from this one." Ethan ended the call, determination coursing through him. He returned to Amelia's room, watching her sleep peacefully. She had been a victim of Victor's twisted plans, but not anymore. He wouldn't let her or anyone else suffer because of him. As he sat beside her, he reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm going to stop him," he whispered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "I'll make sure you're safe, and then we'll rebuild together." Amelia stirred slightly in her sleep, her hand tightening around his. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to believe that there might be hope. He had a chance to make things right, to protect the daughter he never knew he had, to stop the monster who had manipulated them both. The road ahead was uncertain, but Ethan knew one thing. He wasn't running anymore. This time, he was going to fight, and he wouldn't stop until Victor Aldridge was defeated, once and for all. The hum of the helicopter blades cut through the night air as Ethan stared out over the endless stretch of dark ocean below. His mind raced with the weight of what lay ahead. The offshore facility Simon had uncovered was hidden deep within uncharted waters, a fortress built on secrets and lies. Inside, Victor Aldridge had been conducting his twisted experiments, playing God with human lives, including Amelia's. Ethan's grip tightened around the handle of the helicopter's door. He had spent years mastering the art of control, of keeping his emotions at bay. But tonight, as they approached the facility, everything was different. This wasn't about business. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about family. It was about her. Amelia had insisted on coming with him. Despite her injuries, she had refused to stay behind. Her eyes filled with the same resolve that burned inside Ethan. There was no stopping her. She wanted to see this through, to confront the man who had taken her life from her, and to help bring an end to his reign of terror. Now, as she sat beside him, her face pale but determined, Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She was stronger than he ever realized. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the helicopter. Amelia nodded, her expression unwavering. "We end this tonight. Together." The pilot signaled that they were nearing the drop zone. Below them, the silhouette of the facility came into view. A sprawling structure surrounded by water, with tall watchtowers and searchlights scanning the horizon. It looked more like a military base than a research lab, and Ethan knew Victor had fortified it to keep anyone from getting in or out. The helicopter descended, and as they neared the landing pad, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment they had been racing toward. He had spent his entire life fighting for power, control, and wealth, but now none of that mattered. All that mattered was stopping Victor before he could do any more damage. As the helicopter touched down, Ethan and Amelia jumped out, their footsteps silent on the metal platform. The wind whipped through their hair as they crouched low, making their way toward the entrance. Simon had provided a detailed layout of the facility. Victor's lab was deep underground, heavily guarded, but accessible through a hidden passage in one of the main buildings. Ethan led the way, his heart racing as they entered the facility. The air inside was cold, sterile, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Every corner they turned, every empty hallway, filled him with dread. It felt like the calm before the storm. He could sense that Victor was waiting for them. They reached the hidden passage, a narrow stairwell that descended into the depths of the facility. As they made their way down, the tension between them grew palpable. Amelia's face was set in stone, her eyes focused ahead. She hadn't said much since they arrived, but Ethan could feel her fear, her determination to see this through. Finally, they reached the door to Victor's lab. Ethan took a deep breath, glancing at Amelia. "This is it," he said softly. Amelia nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm ready." Ethan pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The lab was massive, filled with rows of machines and computers, tubes and wires running along the walls. But it was the sight in the center of the room that made Ethan's blood run cold. Victor stood at a large control panel, his back turned to them. In front of him, inside a glass chamber, were several children, no older than 7 or 8. Their eyes were wide with fear, their small bodies hooked up to machines, just as Amelia had been all those years ago. Ethan's heart sank. He had known Victor was dangerous, but seeing the children, the innocent lives being used as part of his sick experiment, filled him with a rage unlike anything he had ever felt before. Victor turned slowly, a twisted smile on his face. "Ethan," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I've been expecting you." Ethan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "It's over, Victor." Victor's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Over? No, Ethan. It's just beginning. You have no idea the power I've unlocked. These children, you, Amelia, are just the start. I've perfected the technology. I've created a new generation of humans, ones who are stronger, smarter, better than anyone else. And now, I'll finish what I started." Amelia stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "You used me. You destroyed my life. But it ends tonight, Victor. I won't let you hurt anyone else." Victor's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. "Hurt," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I gave you life, Amelia. Without me, you wouldn't even exist. You should be thanking me." Ethan's blood boiled. "Enough of this," he growled. "We're taking those children, and we're shutting this place down." Victor chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You always were so naive, Ethan. You can't stop this. I've already won." Ethan moved toward him, but before he could take another step, Victor pressed a button on the control panel. The lights in the lab flickered, and suddenly, the glass chamber containing the children began to fill with gas. "No!" Amelia screamed, rushing toward the chamber. Ethan followed, but Victor stepped in their path, blocking their way. "You can't save them," Victor sneered. "You can't save any of them." Ethan's heart raced as he fought to reach the control panel, but Victor was too quick. They grappled, trading blows, but Ethan's focus was split between stopping Victor and saving the children. He landed a solid punch across Victor's jaw, sending him stumbling back, but it wasn't enough. "Amelia, the panel!" Ethan shouted, struggling to keep Victor down. Amelia, tears streaming down her face, rushed to the control panel. Her hands trembled as she frantically tried to override the system, her fingers flying across the buttons. The gas continued to fill the chamber. The children's cries were muffled by the thick glass, their terrified faces pressing against the barrier as they struggled for air. Come on," Amelia muttered, her breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. Victor laughed through bloodied lips as he staggered back to his feet. "It's too late," he sneered, wiping his mouth. "You're too late." But then, with a final desperate push, Amelia found the right sequence. The gas stopped, and the chamber doors hissed open. The children stumbled out, gasping for air as Amelia rushed to their side, pulling them to safety. Ethan, his strength renewed by the sight of Amelia saving the children, turned to Victor one last time. "You've lost," he said, his voice steady, filled with finality. Victor, his face twisted with rage, lunged at Ethan, but this time Ethan was ready. He ducked, delivering a swift punch that sent Victor crashing to the ground. Ethan stood over him, his breath heavy, his fists clenched. He could end this. Right now. "Do it," Victor spat, his face contorted with hatred. "Finish it, Ethan." Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. The rage inside him screamed for vengeance. But then he looked at Amelia, the daughter he had just found, the children she had saved, and he knew that killing Victor would make him no better. Instead, Ethan stepped back. "You're not worth it." As the sound of distant sirens echoed through the facility, Ethan turned to Amelia, who was guiding the children to safety. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with relief. "It's over," she whispered. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the last few days lift from his shoulders. "It's over." Together, they walked out of the facility, leaving Victor behind as the authorities closed in. For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't care about the battles he had lost, the power he had sacrificed. All that mattered was that he had protected his daughter, and in doing so, he had finally found redemption. As they stepped into the cold night air, Amelia looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and hope. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan smiled, pulling her close. "We're in this together," he replied. "From now on, we're a family." And for the first time, Ethan felt like he had finally won the only battle that truly mattered. 6 months had passed since that fateful night at Victor's hidden facility. The memories of the confrontation were still vivid in Ethan's mind. The sound of the gas hissing, the cries of the children, Victor's twisted grin as his empire crumbled. But now, standing on the balcony of his home overlooking the quiet city skyline, those memories felt distant, like a storm that had finally passed. The aftermath had been chaotic. Victor Aldridge was arrested, his entire operation dismantled by international authorities. The children he had experimented on were placed in safe hands, given the care and protection they had been denied for so long. And Amelia, she had been the one who saved them. Her bravery had inspired not only Ethan, but everyone involved in the case. Ethan had testified in court, helping to ensure that Victor would never harm anyone again. The media had been relentless, eager to uncover every detail about the scandal involving Blackwood Industries' former projects, but for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't care about public perception or damage control. His focus had shifted, his priorities irrevocably changed. He turned, watching as Amelia stepped out onto the balcony. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The fear that had once haunted her eyes had been replaced with determination. The wounds from her injury had healed, though the emotional scars would take longer to fade. But she was moving forward, building a life that was finally hers. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this normal," Amelia said quietly, leaning on the railing beside him. The cool evening breeze brushed through her hair, and she smiled, a soft, genuine smile that Ethan hadn't seen often in the past months. "You deserve this, Amelia," Ethan replied, his voice filled with warmth. "After everything, you've earned it." She looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "I still think about those other kids, the ones Victor experimented on. I wonder how they're doing." Ethan nodded. "They're being taken care of. I've made sure of that. And we'll keep an eye on them, make sure they have a future. One that Victor never intended for them." Amelia was quiet for a moment, then she sighed, turning to face him fully. "You've done so much, Ethan. For them. For me. I don't know how to thank you." Ethan smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. I'm your father. That's what I'm supposed to do." The word father still felt new, strange even, but with each passing day, it felt a little more real. Amelia was no longer just a mystery he had stumbled upon during a storm. She was his daughter, his family. And with that came a responsibility that Ethan embraced with all his heart. "I never thought I'd have this," Amelia admitted, her voice soft. "A family. Someone who actually cares." Ethan's chest tightened, but it was a good kind of ache, one filled with love and hope. He reached out and pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "You'll always have me," he whispered. "From now on, no more running. We face everything together." Amelia hugged him back, her grip firm, as if she were finally allowing herself to trust in the future. They stood there for a long moment, the city lights twinkling beneath them, the darkness of their past finally receding. As they broke apart, Amelia glanced at him with a mischievous glint in her eye. "So, what's next for Ethan Blackwood? World domination? Another tech empire?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "No more empires for me. I think I've had enough of that." Amelia grinned. "Good. We could use a little peace and quiet for a change." Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting out to the horizon. He had spent so many years chasing power, success, and control. But now, as he stood beside Amelia, he realized that none of it had ever mattered as much as this. Family, connection, love. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly at peace. There were no more enemies lurking in the shadows, no more ghosts of the past haunting him. Just a new beginning. He turned to Amelia, his heart full. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said. "And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Amelia smiled, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. Together. And for the first time in both of their lives, they knew that they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was enough.